Hello, everyone, and welcome to Africa Fire Mission's weekly virtual training session. I would like to thank everybody for taking time out of their busy schedules to come out and join us for today's training. Today, we're joined by Ed Collet. Ed is a subject matter expert on a lot of different areas of the fire service. He's been working with us for a number of years. It's a real pleasure to get to work with him and listen to him talk about different subjects. Today, we're going to be talking about vehicle extrication. Ed was also a vital component in getting our virtual training program started here with Africa Fire Mission. We really appreciate all of the work that he does for our organization. If you stick around for at least 70% of today's training, which is usually about 40 or 45 minutes, you'll receive a certificate of attendance for today's training. So be sure that you set your name that you want on your certificate as your name here on your screen. You're more than welcome to introduce yourselves in the chat. If you have any questions throughout our training, you can also put those in the chat. And I invite you to stick around for tea time afterwards, where we'll have time to ask questions about today's training or any other topic that's on your mind. Before we get started here, I'm going to pass it over to Jose, our fire safety advocate with AFM, for today's word of encouragement. Take it away, Jose.
Thank you, Chief Mike. I truly appreciate you. And thank you, Ed, for joining us again today. Right now, I'm in a different location, and I'm just from an event here at the Kiambu Fire and Rescue substation. And there's one thing I noticed that was happening even in the event, because we had the governor of Kiambu here and also the Polish ambassador who was here. And one thing that I came to notice or learn is relationships. You see, when Chief Kahora stood up and started talking about Kiambu Fire Brigade, he said they started under a tree. Yes, that was way back in the 2000s. They started under a tree. I mean, I can't remember the year he said, but it was quite a distant back. So he said that they started under a tree. And right now, where I'm seated is actually a boardroom where they received funding from Polish aid to build a school, to refurbish their fire station, and all those things. Of course, as Africa Fire Mission, we partner with them by giving them PPE and equipment. But here's the thing, relationships are key. When you want to scale up or to go to the next level, you'll go up to the next level much easier when you have relationships and the correct networks. Carry with you people, the people who's going to carry with you, the people who are going to take you to the next level. It's not everybody you're going to go to the next level with, you know? So trust me, whoever doesn't want to go with you and you have a certain goal, go with them. The goal of Chief Kahora was to have a training center here in Kiambu. He did achieve it one time. Development takes time, you know, and relationships last. So make sure that even as you're in your firehouse right now, or even in your personal life, keep your relationship so strong that when you need to go to the next level, you can be able to reach out to me as Jose, you can be able to reach out to somebody else and ask them, hey, can I be able to sleep over at your house? I'm having an interview in your town. And they will be able to say, yes, you can come to my house and sleep over. So today, that is actually what really stood out for me. I would want to encourage you wherever you are in your firehouse or even in your personal life. When you keep your relationships close, you can be able, they will call you over. You see now, for example, they call me as a fire safety advocate to attend that very big event. They're like, Jose, are you available? Because I'm the friend of Kahora, they call me over because I know, I hope that I bring value to his life. So back to you, and always remember that relationships to the next level count. Thank you so much. Back to you, Chief Mike.
Thank you, Jose. Those are some wise words. We really appreciate all the thought and effort that you put into forwarding the fire service all throughout Africa. All right, at this point in time, we're going to begin today's presentation, and I'm going to pass it over to Ed Collet. Go ahead, Ed.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Let's go ahead. Today we are going to be talking about vehicle extrication. Last week we started off with the basics and by talking about tools that we use for our extrication purposes. And today we will be talking more about tactics for our extrication. So we'll start off with kind of our overview. Even though we talked about some things last week a little bit, we want to zero in on talking about some of the hazard recognition in our PPE. And then we'll get on to some of our basic tactics that we're going to do to patients. The big thing with extrication, unless there are extenuating circumstances, which are matters of life and death, that we are taking our time and we're removing the vehicle from around the patient and not removing the patient from the car. We do it this way to limit the injuries to the patient and make the whole process more smooth for them and not to exacerbate any injuries they already have, or worse yet, increase their injuries. You're taking the first step in improving your ability for extrication just by coming to this training. Even though it is difficult to get vehicles to actually train on in Kenya and throughout Africa, doing tabletop, going out and studying vehicles, working with the tools to understand how they operate, all of these are little things that, even though we can't actually put the tools to a car for training often, we can spend some time going through different scenarios saying, what would we do if we had to do this? What, if a car is in this position, what type of tools would we use? How would we use them? How does this tool work? What do the controls do? How do we open spreaders? How do we close spreaders? Our jacks that we use, just getting very familiar with our tools and taking that time to train, and also getting familiar with vehicles. It is very important to know different parts of the vehicle in order not only to employ our tactics from a command level. When you're giving and receiving orders about the extrication, we need to have a common vocabulary. As we look at the different body parts of the car, the A pillar, the B pillar, the C pillar, the roof, the rocker panels, these are all critical areas we need to be able to identify and clearly communicate with each other and those controlling the incident as to what areas we're going to cut, push, pull, and work on. Doing some of this study is important and helps you become better at extrication. Simple things like looking how your doors open. Just go out to your car, open the door, identify where the nadir pin is located, and also where the latch for that. You see those circled in red, and they're in different locations on different doors, be it the front door is slightly different than the back door. They can be higher, they can be lower. Identifying where these normally are, if we have to force a door, our goal is to basically defeat the nadir pin, either by forcing it out with a spreader or a jack, or by cutting it with hydraulic cutters, sawzalls, air chisels, whatever type of cutting device you may have. Identifying and knowing what it looks like and where to find it is very important. Then going into kind of our safety, for kind of our scene safety, Airbags serve two roles. I mean, there's two things we have to look at it from a first responder standpoint. They keep the patient safer than cars without airbags. However, we need to be aware when a car has airbags and where they're located to keep us safe. If we are in the path of an undeployed airbag, we can get injured. As you can see, airbags are all over throughout a vehicle, in the seats, under the dash. The common ones we always knew about were in the steering wheel and in the dashboard. Now they're all over the car. This is another reason we always want to peel away all of the trim. This is a very important tactic. Some people think it's, mundane and think that we can bypass it, but you need to expose all of the trim to see what's under it. There are gas cylinders, as you can see here, vertically on the B post and tucked up in a C post there. If we do not identify where those gas charges are and we go to cut something, it could have a very catastrophic impact on us and the patient. We basically would be making a second incident that we need to care for injured firefighters when we cut into those. Those cylinders are roughly between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds of pressurized gas. When we cut those, it's like an explosion when they rip open. We want to avoid those, peel out all the interior, assign someone to peel the interior, and make sure they identify if the car has those cylinders and where we are clear to cut. The power of the airbags when they deploy and airbag is to this exceed any to a want to hurry. But that starts arming. Want to do things like raising maybe some could we want to let the slide and they were the first thing we want to do when we start going to an incident is we need to, our tactics are going to be based on that incident. And that starts at the time of dispatch. And the assessments we do are, we know where is the accident that we're going to, is it a busy highway? Is it a parking lot? Is it a, street with little traffic, or is it a slow speed road versus a high speed road? This starts to get your ideal going of the severity that we may come into. The time of day. Is it rush hour? Is it the middle of the night with little traffic? What's the weather? sunny, or is there a rainstorm that's cause the incident? And location, time of day, and weather, not only will that tell you something about the accident, it will also tell you something about your response time. All of those things will go into how fast you're able to get to the scene. And then how many victims and how many vehicles do we have involved? While dispatch may tell you these things, we need to verify these once we get on scene, especially the number of victims. There may be people that were not seen in a car, people that get ejected from a vehicle. We need to make sure we do a full scene survey in order to find out how many victims we have. Once we arrive on scene, we need to make sure we secure the roadway to provide us a safe area to work in. We want to place our apparatus to block traffic, give us that safe area, yet we want it to be close enough and able to provide access to tools and any suppression equipment. And also, we want to block one extra lane of traffic if we can. So we've gotten our dispatch, we've arrived on scene, we've blocked the road with our apparatus in order to make the scene safe for us. The next thing we're going to do is, like in a fire, we need to do a 360. What are the hazards that's involved with this extrication? Fuel, what type, this can be fuel on the ground, what type of fuel is in the vehicle? Is it a normal petrol car? Is it a diesel car? Is it electric or hybrid? Those are other things we need to talk about and take into consideration. Are there wires down? If there's wires down, we need to contact the electric authority to be able to de-energize them. One thing we always want to do is, if we see wires down, we want to stay away from them. And if they're across the car, we want to make sure we keep the people in the car and tell them, don't try to come out, wait until the power is turned off. That's something that sometimes may take a while. And as first responders, we're very action driven, and we see a problem and we need to do something. When there's live electric lines, we need to see the problem, recognize it, and wait until the proper people can deal with that issue for us. What type of cargoes can be in the vehicles? It's very, well, for us, and I don't know the laws in Kenya over transporting hazardous materials in lorries. Here, you can usually find they're either labeled as what type of hazardous materials they're carrying, or the driver will have what they call a bill of lading, giving you everything that's in that truck. That lorry, that becomes very easy for us to determine what type of hazards we may be facing for the cargo, how much weight, these things we have to deal with. But there's another type of cargo we have no knowledge of. If we just have a regular vehicle accident, what's in the trunk of those cars? Are there people carrying gas home, to use for their equipment at home? Do they have propane in it? Other hazardous materials we may not know about, fertilizer, insecticide, all of these things that could potentially be hazardous to us and a danger to us as first responders as we work there. We want to make sure any fluids that are on the ground, we're going to have to mitigate those, not only, from a vapor side as far as any flammability issues, but it comes down as simple slips and falls. While we're not, like for my department, we don't worry much about antifreeze on the road and sometimes transmission fluid, but they're not a real hazard as far as flammability. There is a slight environmental hazard, but they do pose a hazard for us slipping as we're working around it. And also, during your 360, where are the victims? Don't just look in the car, look around the car, look under the car. Make sure you've identified everyone. This is talking to other occupants, talking to bystanders. These things can help you determine what you have as far as a number of victims. And sometimes we've had victims that were ejected that were hundreds of meters from the car. Ones that just got up and staggered away and then fell over on the side of the road, and we didn't realize, it took us a while to realize that they were part of the accident. These are things that, while it's the main responsibility of the commander, we all have a certain responsibility as we're doing our jobs to always kind of have a 360 view of the incident and all of the things that we need to know to be able to properly address what's going on. This is kind of a key before we start digging into anything. PPE, we talked about it a little last week with tools. PPE is a tool. It's probably our most important tool. We want to protect ourselves from any of the dangers inherent in extricating a patient. Fire gear in case there would be a flash fire, but more so protecting us from the sharp edges, the glass, the fluids, all of this stuff. That's what our fire gear can protect us from. If you don't have fire gear, you should at least have long sleeve shirt and also long pants before doing any type of extrication. Safety glasses is a must. Whereas we cut things can fly. Glass can fly when we're cutting it or we're spreading doors. We have one set of eyes, and taking a little time and a little investment in a good pair of safety glasses goes a long way to preserving our eyesight, so we have it for years to come. The worst thing we want to do is go there, we're trying to help someone that's in dire need, and we end up losing part of our eyesight just because we weren't wearing safety glasses or damaging our eyesight. We really want to have safety glasses on. Then leather gloves to protect our hands. Just a simple pair of gloves would, good leather gloves that don't get cut easily are very important to have. I've seen people use very thin, like mechanic style gloves. They're made out of synthetic material. These often are very easily cut. It's, in my view, just a simple pair of leather gloves for you provides the proper protection for your hands. High visibility vests, these are important. We're working in roadways. There's other drivers. We all know half the people driving today are more concerned with looking at their phones than they are looking at the road. Just a little more visibility for them to see us and give us, give them a quick, there's someone here, I need to not hit them. Give them a little more warning that we're there. And finally, if we can have helmets on, that helps our head so we're not bumping it, hitting it. I will say sometimes our traditional American fire helmets are not conducive to a lot of the things we have to do in a extrication situation. This is a reason I've actually went out and I actually use a special rescue helmet. The European style fire helmets are actually very good in extrication scenarios. They don't have the big brim that gets hung up if you're trying to crawl in and look in things. If you have the option between an American style and a European style during an extrication, I would say the European style is probably going to be a little better for an extrication if you don't have the ability to have a separate specialized rescue helmet. So we've arrived on scene, we've secured our work area, we've secured our person by having our PPE on, we've done our 360, we understand what we need to do, and now it's time to go ahead and employ our tactics that we're going to use. There are many things that decide tactics, the level of entrapment, the number of victims. You know, this could be a simple entrapment of just popping a door open for someone. Having numerous victims, you need to decide which one's coming out first to make the progression of extrication work smoothly and effectively. How severe are the injuries? Is the patient injured minor, so we can allowing us to take more time and, you know, maybe do some different things on our extrication? Or are they severely injured and they need to come out now, which means our tactics are going to kind of be more, we'll say, brute force, but we're going to be very measured in our force, but we're still going to act very quickly to get the car away from the person in order to extract the patient. How the vehicle is oriented, is it's on its roof, its tires, on its side. These impact the type of tactics we are going to employ. And today we're basically going to be talking about vehicles that are on their wheels, or, you know, as we would call it, clean side up, with the roof being up. And what are your resources? These resources are not only tools, but trained first responders to use the tools. I can have the best tools in the world. If I have no training on those tools, an extrication will not go well, if at all. On the other hand, if I have very rudimentary tools and highly skilled and highly trained first responders, they can take a car apart quicker than unskilled people with heavy hydraulic tools. So it's that training and the resource, managing not only the tools, but the personnel that are trained, and, you know, also the medical resources. That's kind of one thing, you know, that you also need to think about as well there. So the first thing we want to do is access the patient. Now, this could be a very quick tactic, just simple opening the door behind them, next to them, or breaking a side window, rear window, you know, anything that's going to provide us a safe route to get into the vehicle. When you're breaking glass, though, to gain access, one thing we want to do is make sure you warn people you're breaking glass, and try to do it in such a way that we don't push the glass back into the car. You know, once we break it, we want to try to pull it out of the vehicle. That's why carrying, you know, one of the small tools we talked about last week, you know, we get focused on the big tools, but little tools like trauma shears, knives, and like window punches can be very effective in the initial stages of an extrication to gain access. Find the patient, you're going to find the level of consciousness, how trapped are they, how injured are they, and also how many other people were with them. We've got access to the patient. Now we've got an idea of how entrapped they are. Now we need to start how we're going to do our extrication. We're going to stabilize the vehicle using our cribbing, any solid objects that we can find that are stable. You could use large flat rocks if you don't have cribbing with you. Just see what's in the environment. But it just has to be solid and robust and fit under the vehicle. The two reasons we're stabilizing a car is, one, to prevent movement and further injuries, both to us and to the patient, and to provide a path for the force from our tools to go to the ground, and properly to allow us to make the force go where we want it, opposed to where it's just naturally going to go without any type of stabilization. Normally, where we're going to place our cribbing, will be having step chocks or cribbing under each of the corner, and like in this, you'll see our step chock under the A post, usually under the A post, and the back by the C post. Depending upon the type of tactics we're going to do, we can even do under the B post to help support it. Also depends on the level of structural integrity of the car. One thing that we're really going to look at, not only as our tools, but when we do it, our tactics, how is the metal bent? How is the car already damaged? This will greatly impact on how we position our tools, how we use our tools. We'll start off with just basic access and getting into a car with a door removal. One thing that you need to watch is if the door is already pushed in, how is that going to, when I put my spreaders or my jack on it to try to move the door, which direction is that door going to move? Is the middle of the door going to move back into the patient? Or am I going to be able to pull that door out away from the patient as it comes away? We have to watch how the metal the damaged metal is reacting as we're going through. And even if we start in one direction with a tactic and we see the metal going towards the patient and may be more detrimental to the patient than if we did another tactic, it's okay to stop. One thing that is always nice to have, it's always nice to have like the incident commander stepping back and not being involved and being able to watch everything and stepping in when us as firefighters get tunnel vision to one tactic that may either be detrimental to the patient or isn't quite working. We always say we have plans A through whatever, but a lot of times it's actually plan A harder, plan A even harder, plan A with all the force we possibly have. So it's kind of like we don't change our tactics, we just keep beating on it harder and harder when that's not going in the right direction. Before we actually pry the door open, we want to get the glass out of the door. This is important. If we don't do that, the glass will remove itself in an explosive way. The big thing is cover the patient if possible. Let them know you're breaking the glass. One trick that I found is very effective into minimizing the amount of glass that goes everywhere. If you have the ability, roll down the window till you have maybe just a centimeter or two above the edge of the door, and then you can break the glass there, and the glass will then fall down into the door itself. Once you've removed the glass, now we have to get a purchase point. A purchase point is a gap that allows us to insert our tools to start the extrication process. Sometimes the car gives you a purchase point. If you look at the vehicle in the lower left, you can see by that door, it's already started to gap both at the front door and a little at the back door. We can exploit these gaps that we already have and start to get our spreaders in, our jacks in, and start to move little by little to open that up, that purchase point up and make it bigger. If we don't have a purchase point or we need a bigger one, the spreader, if we have spreaders or other prying tools will want to stick in the gaps between the door and the body, and then we can pry that open to try to wiggle back and forth to open up a space there in between the door and the body. If you have heavy hydraulic spreaders or even like a high lift jack, you can put the tips of the spreaders in, as we see on the right, catch the roof and then the top of the door frame, and then open up and push it down. On this, again, tool placement is always very important. You want to make sure, remember, a spreader doesn't go straight out. A spreader opens in an arc. When you position this, you want to make sure you take that into account. One of the most simple yet effective lessons I've learned as far as extrication is the backhand controls the angle of the tool, and that's the most important part, is to understand and realize where your backhand is to give the proper elevation and angle to the tools to work them properly. We're going to the nadir pin. Like, that is what's holding the door on. We want to defeat it. As we spread in, we just take little spreads. As soon as, the biggest thing is, if the metal starts to tear, we stop, reposition the tool, and start our spreading again. As soon as the metal tears, we stop, because we're losing strength of the metal. The strongest points on any type of metal that's fabricated and molded are the corners. When you see a corner, that's a good place to put your spreader tip, put a jack against, and push out. And you not only can you spread the door off of the nadir pin, once exposed and you have the capability, you could actually cut the nadir pin with heavy hydraulic cutters, potentially an air chisel, even with the proper blade. You can cut around it with a sawzall to cut the mechanism that's holding onto the nadir pin, or actually cut the nadir pin away from the body. With a sawzall, you're not going to be cutting the actual nadir pin itself. Then once you get the door cut, then you can go ahead from the nadir pin, remove from the nadir pin, then you can go ahead and cut off with either cut the hinges, or you can spread the hinges off. It's important which one you start with. You always want to start with the bottom hinge, especially if you're going to be spreading. If you start with the top and the bottom is still intact, you're going to be pushing against a pivot point that will push the door into the ground and pick the car up. If we spread the bottom first, or we cut the bottom hinge first, then when we go to push or cut the top, there's no pivot for the door to push down against and raise the car up. That door can fold under and then just drop down without pulling the car off of our cribbing or raising it up. Even doing it in that order, once we've completed a door removal, we want to check our cribbing. One, just to see if during our tactics something pushed against our cribbing, but also remember, as we take parts of the car off, we make it lighter. As we make the car lighter, it raises up on the springs. That will get it away from our cribbing, requiring us to reset the cribbing or our stabilization back to capture the car again. Just remember, it's important to check our cribbing once we're done with each tactic and check our stabilization. We talked a little bit for doing it with lighter tools. So really, we're going to, if you have high lift jacks, you're going to insert the jack in the windows. If you're going to be cutting it out, we're basically going to be cutting a section of the doorway to get rid of the latching mechanism that's connected to the nadir pin. Once we've cut that locking mechanism out of the door, we can be able to spring the door open freely. With air tools, you're going to use the bits and kind of do the same thing. You'll be able to open up space to get to the nadir pin. And then once you're at the nadir pin, you're able to use some of the heavier bits like the half moon or the flat bit to cut the nadir pin, cut the door around the latching mechanism around it, and also to cut the hinges. Now, in this situation, once the hinges are exposed, my personal preference over using the air chisel to cut the hinges would be to unbolt the hinges from the car. If they're exposed to use an air chisel, you should be able to get a wrench in there. And most times, a wrench and socket, you should be able to unbolt the hinges probably just as quickly as you can cutting them with an air chisel. The benefit of not using the air chisel at the hinges is an air chisel makes a lot of noise and a lot of vibration. Minimizing that type of those types of things around the patient is always beneficial. We can remove one door, or we can remove the whole side of the car as a unit. This is a great tactic if you have front seat and back seat passengers that need extricated. Instead of doing one door, then another door, and then having the B-post in the way often to cut out, you remove the entire side of the vehicle as one unit, starting by removing the rear door. And then as you open up the rear door, that gives you access to the B-pillar. What you'll do then is you cut the top of the B-post, and then you get in as far deep as you can and cut the bottom of the B-post. This can be done with the cutters. I prefer sometimes using a sawzall to get the bottom of the B-post. It allows me to get a little farther into the B-post. A lot of times the B-posts are very wide in modern cars, and you can only get maybe halfway with a set of cutters, whereas having a sawzall allows you to get a longer portion of the B-post cut. When you're at the B-post and doing the cuts, there's two things you really need to be careful about. Up top, you can see up in this area would be where the seatbelt bolts in. There is a very strong hardened bolt that is up in that area. If you put cutters on it, you will damage the cutters. It is actually stronger than the cutters, and the angle that it actually gets pulled into the blades has some potential for damage. We want to be away from that bolt. Also, if we're using other tools like saws and air chisels, they will not go through that bolt. We want to cut above that bolt. When you get down below, as you can see, the seatbelt mechanism, we want to try to stay above the seatbelt mechanism. As you can see with that, the spreader, these cutters have kind of rolled over a bit because of the seatbelt mechanism. Go above the seatbelt mechanism, or if you can get below it, go below it. But whatever you do, don't clamp down around that seatbelt. It will damage your cutters. Then once you have that cut, you can have that first cut in the B-post. You may need to make additional cuts to be able to get between the rocker panel. Then what you do is you place your spreaders in between the B-post, in between the door and the rocker panel, and then you spread open the front of part of that should pull the rocker panel away. We've already cut our B-post. We want to cut that up high. And then once we have that B-post spread at the bottom and cut at the top, the next thing the final thing we do is either cut or remove the hinges from the body of the car. Then that takes out the whole side. Again, this is one of those things where if you're not comfortable doing it, you shouldn't do it. Take one door, then the other door, and then cut out the B-post. This is kind of one of those advanced tactics that you need to train on in order to become really proficient at it. And it's always about teamwork when we're doing extrication. No matter what tool you have, if it's not being used, you need to be ready to go should the person that's working with their tool either breaks, or their tool breaks, or they need you to go in and use your tool to make it easier for them to work their tool. A common way to think about that is in the use of heavy hydraulics, the spreader person and the cutter person work together as a dance, where like when I'm opening the door to cut the hinges, the spreader the spreader person will come in and just spread the door just a little bit to give a little more room for the cutters. They step back, the cutter person comes in, cuts the top hinge. If they need more room at the bottom, they step in, spreaders step in, opens to give them a little more room at the top hinge after they've cut the bottom hinge. Then they can come in and cut the top hinge again. So I mean, it's really a lot of working together, coordinating, and you can even role play almost these types of things without ever cutting a car, just opening a door and saying, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm pretending I'm spreading. Okay, now I'm backing out, and then the next person comes in, and you can work on the coordination. That's one thing that you can get to without actually having to have a car. Couple things on the next part is if we have the side of the car removed, now if people are trapped with the dash and we need to get the steering wheel off of them, we need to make several cuts to be able to defeat the strength of the car. At minimum, these 2 cuts we see up on the A-post, we need to cut the A-post. When we do an A-post cut, we always want to make 2 cuts and remove a section of A-post. If we just make 1 cut, when we go to raise up the dash, oftentimes that cut will bind. To prevent the binding, we cut a chunk out of the A-post. Then we cut at the firewall. Coming up, going forward, we cut that structure there. We used a nice V-cut on that so we can get deeper with our cutters. And also, again, so we're not binding when we're jacking things up. These are areas that we can use a Sawzall or an air chisel just as easily as we can with heavy hydraulics. And then the big cut we make is the important cut is down low there horizontally on the A-post. This is one of those tactics where removing the fender, it seems like a little thing, but as soon as you remove the fender, you can see what you're cutting, and it makes the job much easier. So this slide just walks us through the lower cut, the V cut in the under the fender for the front structure, and then our double A-post cut. Once we have all the cuts completed, we can insert our spreaders into the horizontal cut on the A-post. And this is one where we start small and we're making little purchase to make sure we get our spreaders or our jacks in, and we have them in a good position, in a firm position, so they don't move. And once you have that solid base started and established, you can go ahead and open the spreader way, and you can move. Sometimes we need to use what they call a dash roll. Instead of raising the dash vertically up, what we're doing is we're rolling it front away from the patient. These have a couple different cuts. The A-post cut is the same, but now we're trying to cut a section out of that front structure of the car. And now, instead of being a horizontal cut on our A-post, it's a diagonal cut at the A-post down between the corner of the rocker panel and the A-post. Basically, when we make that cut, we're making a hinge to roll the dash forward with. When we're doing the dash roll, we're using a ram compared to our spreader. Once we've done all our cuts, we place the ram. Another thing we want to make sure, we always want to make sure we have at least, I'd say, probably a quarter to a half a meter of A-post available before we cut it. Sometimes people will cut the A-post very close to the firewall. That is not good for this type of maneuver. You need a long section of A-post remaining between the dash and where your cut is in order to put the ram in place. So if the ram does slip a little, it is slipping up and it's still on the A-post. Again, very important to make sure we remove all of our interior plastics, not only to see where we can cut, but to make sure our ram has a solid material to grip against. These don't grip very well on plastic. They bite into metal. That's why we want to always have metal to metal contact with our tools. And before we had all the heavy hydraulics to do dash lifts and dash rolls, we would simply pull the steering column off of the patient. And this can be used with the spreaders, but more often than not, it's used with come-alongs, high lift jacks, and chains. What we're doing is you wrap the steering wheel in an X form with a chain underneath it. And then you stack up if you stack cribbing either at the firewall to bridge the firewall and over, or if you're using a jack or spreaders, you're going to put a piece of long cribbing, usually a 4x4, you're going to put that between the roof and the dash to be able to set your jack or your spreaders on. And if you simply have a come-along, you're going to set up where you have your come-along with its chain here. You're going to attach it to the front bumper here. And then you'll build up cribbing here to give a high point for the angle of the pull to pull the steering wheel up. And this cribbing will fall down, but it's just a cycle. You'll pull it up, it'll fall, you reset and go again. And here's your come-along that you would use to crank up to bring the steering wheel up and off the patient. Roof removal, fairly simple. Using our cutting tools, be it hydraulics, electric, air, go ahead and you're going to cut, all the posts as high as we can, A post, B post, C post, D post if available. One thing to make sure when you do this, you need enough people to support the roof so it doesn't fall on the patient. That's one thing we want to be critical about. Sometimes the roof is just too big to cut the whole roof off, like in this case of this van. What we have then is you'll cut either with some of your cutting device, cut all the way across it, or simply do a couple cuts to weaken it on the edge, and then you can fold it back. You can do the same thing. Instead of folding back, you can fold it to the side by making a couple relief cuts and then only cutting one side. This is beneficial if you do not have the manpower. Sometimes it takes 4 firefighters just to hold the roof if you're cutting the roof all the way off and moving it back. In this case, you'd just be able to fold it back and the car is still supporting the roof and you have access to the patient. So as we come down on time, we'll go ahead and are there questions on what we've done so far with talking about tactics on extrication?
Anybody has any questions? Go ahead and either raise your hand or just go ahead and unmute, and we'll take just a couple questions here. I know Ed has to get going here soon. So any quick questions anybody might have? Go ahead, Alex. I see we've got a hand raised there. Alex, go ahead, sir. Go ahead, sir. We've got you there. Looks like your network's a little slow there. I see another hand up. David. David, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello, Edward.
Go ahead, sir.
On matters of purchase point, what is a pre tool? Can you give me some examples?
Ed, we've got a question there looking for what tool to use to make a purchase point.
Yeah.
Hello, Mike. Hello, Mike. Can you hear me?
Let me go ahead and take that question there. We had regarding tools for the purchase point. Any kind of a pry bar, a Halligan tool. In some places that I've seen where there's a lack of hand tools, I've seen using like a piece of rebar that's been filed to a point at one end to use a prying, a crowbar, any type of prying tool that you can set in with hand or use in combination with some sort of a striking tool like a like a flathead axe or something to that effect would be effective tools for making that purchase point. That answer your question, David? Okay, at this point in time, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's class. Please be sure to stick around. We're going to move over to our tea time hosted by Jose. But during that tea time, we'll be sticking around to provide any answers to any questions that you may have about today's training or any other training. I'd like to thank you for taking your time and using your bundles to attend today's training. A reminder, you can find today's training on YouTube. If you search YouTube for Africa Fire Mission, you'll be able to find all of our trainings there, as well as a link that I provided in the chat where you can find some more information about our training. So thank you all for coming, and we'll see you again next week.